Sitting with her arms folded, she confessed that she had to pay them back for all the suffering they had caused her. Recalling all the events that were a real suffering for her, she promised that she would never forgive them and that her revenge would be sweet only for her. She promised that they would live their last days in despair and torment while she took out her anger on them. She promised that she would manipulate them for her own purposes, as if it were a regular game of chess, and then she threw them away, as they had done to her. For her, they were like old, useless chess pieces, so she had to get rid of them so that nothing would be left. The interlocutor, who was in the room with her all this time and listened attentively to all her words about her great desire for revenge, noted that, judging by all these words, it seems that revenge is the meaning of her life. In fact, she couldn't help but agree because it was partly true, but she couldn't leave the situation unresolved. Thinking back to all those events when she was a prisoner under the control of these same people, if you could call them that, she spent almost all her time looking at the wall and wishing she could leave this place. It was constantly damaged. Even if it was only one area, it was the focus of all the attention of these people. Looking at all her injuries, she hoped that eventually Nell would come to this prison and rescue her. She just had to endure for a little while longer. She looked back at the door, which opened with a corresponding sound, and hoped to see Nell in front of her. But Valentine could only recognize a face full of suffering. Valentine was Neris's sister, who did not even try to help her, but only helped her relatives inflict even more suffering on the girl's terribly tired body. Looking at the dress Valentine was wearing, Neris couldn't help but notice that it was uncannily similar to the dress she had been planning to wear to the gala for a long time. The white-haired girl immediately noticed that Neris's face changed even more when she noticed her dress. She spun it around in front of her as if to show it off, commenting that it suited her much better than her sister's. In addition to the clothes, she also had the opportunity to take her sister's place next to the crown prince, whom she had been planning to marry for as long as she had been choosing her dress. All of this suited her much better. Looking at all of Valentine's actions, she realized that she had not come to support her at all, but only to worsen her condition with her bullying and desire to trample on the dirt even more. The bullying instantly stopped as soon as Valentina remembered the real reason for her visit. In fact, the white-haired girl was ecstatic to see with her own eyes the true end of her dear and beloved sister. Even if the girl was of lower origin, her belonging to a noble family was linked to the corresponding eye color she had the opportunity to inherit. It was easy to take advantage of, but that benefit was not supposed to last long enough for her to live to old age, so it was the most logical end for her to live like this. I knew this from the very beginning, so it took me a while to realize that Valentine had been thinking this way for days and had been dreaming about this day for quite some time. She could not believe that all her family had betrayed her because they had wanted her dead all her life. Valentine was not going to hear it, so she began to give orders to the knight standing next to her. She didn't understand her sister's anger and sudden decision, since she had been helping her all along and doing everything she told her to do. Looking at her clumsy sister, Valentine was tired of wasting time waiting and ordered the knight standing at the door of the prison to seize Neris. Starting to scream with the last of her strength, she tried to break free from the man's tight grip, begging her sister to change her mind. Continuing to escape from the strong grip of one of the knights, Neris continued to claim that she still belonged to a noble family and was the sister of the lord to whom the knight served. Finally, he could not take all these balochki and attempts to escape from his hands for so long, so he put her on the cold floor of the prison, stopping all her attempts to escape. Still in the state of shock she had been in for the last while under her family's rule, Neris only wanted to know if Nell and Nelishan were aware of the situation. Continuing to tease her with her ostentatious tone and the terribly warm smile on her face that completely denied the whole situation, her sister ignored the question, leaving Neris in a state of hysterical thought. Lifting the skirt of her dress, Valentine allowed herself to comment that her sister, although she had gone through similar torment, was still as stupid as she was. One of the legs protruding from the skirt stepped on the girl's injured leg, causing even more pain. She could not believe that Neris still considered herself the master's sister and wanted his servants to believe this lie as well, so her actions were to be some kind of punishment and a share of the abuse she loved so much. Valentine still, she had a bit of humanity in her soul, so she decided to tell her sister something interesting that she would definitely want to hear. She told me that the Nell she was so worried about was the man who killed her mother and planned it all. Neris kept at least a fraction of her hope alive that Nell was not like that, and that he did not have such a desire to hurt her. Without giving Anya a second to think, Valentine continued to fill her head with new information. She said that it was with her help that her family eventually became independent of the empire. It was because of this that she could give Neris the opportunity to pass away painlessly, with just a small vial of potion. Continuing to resist, she could not accept the fact that she was about to die at the hands of her sister, so even as the vial gradually reached her mouth, she continued to try to calm down. It was a kind of gift for the fact that Neris was faithful to the Valentine family until the end of her days. So to hear the truth and to experience a painless death was a great gift and a sign of great kindness. When the magic solution was inside her body, she still couldn't come to terms with the fact that everyone had betrayed her. With a smile on her face, Valentine's mother continued to tell her daughter about her plan for a painless death of her daughter. The woman also noted that everything had to be done quickly and carefully, because even the already soulless body of the lucky woman could be very useful in inheriting the magical eye color. As Valentine poured the last drops of the potion into Neris's still-living body, she noted that none of Neris's efforts had been in vain, nor had the drops of the magic potion. Nerissa's eyes seemed mischievous, as if they were developing shards of pink glass faster and faster. Commenting on her sister's efforts, Valentine also said that she had played an excellent piece in their chess game. Hearing these words, it was as if a second breath of air had appeared in Nerissa's soul. She remembered that for the sake of her family and the empire, she had gone above and beyond and done everything, and now she was being told to just give it all up. Before she found herself on the cold floor, unable to breathe, she was still thinking about what she had done wrong. She was not guilty because of her lowly origins, which she could not change. She was not guilty because of the color of her eyes, which she also inherited against her will. It was all horrible and unfair. All of them took her life for something she could not choose. When her soul separated from her body, and she fell on the cold stone that was under her feet and filled the entire prison, she spoke words in her head, cursing all the perpetrators. Already on his motionless, pale face, crystal tears began to appear, flowing in large quantities from his broken eyes. The red, viscous liquid dripped into the middle of the broken clock, where it turned into crystal-clear water at the junction of the two halves. A transparent liquid gradually poured out of the base of this broken clock, turning into a transparent, bright gem whose light could blind anyone. Suddenly, those same big, bright eyes could see again. It was like the end, but also like the beginning of something new. A clear liquid continued to pour out of those big, childish eyes. Very quickly, the little Neris was able to regain consciousness and feel alive again, hearing her mother calling out to her. Looking at her daughter's crying face, the woman could not understand the reason for the incessant tears. Wiping them with her hand, she looked into the eyes of the little frightened girl. Her face was full of questions, and she was trying to find a connection between them. Neris quickly recognized her mother in the face of the white-haired woman. She could hear her tenderness in her touch and words, which she had only been able to recall for many years. The small house in which Neris and her mother grew up was always very quiet, except for the occasional voice of her mother calling out to her daughter. As she loudly opened the door to her daughter's room, the woman said that she had better be ready to go to the academy, otherwise she might be late. Looking into the back of her room, she saw her daughter standing in front of the mirror, with the wind from the open window blowing her hair and skirt. Reacting quickly, Neris looked back at her mother with a smile on her face that was full of joy. The woman's reaction was a bit confused, which embarrassed her daughter a bit. She asked her mother if something had happened to her, because looking at her expression, one could assume that she was worried about something. The woman replied that everything was normal, and that for a second she thought that her little Neris had become an adult. It was as if the woman was already missing her daughter, based on the fact that she was to leave the house today. Without letting her mother finish, the little girl threw her arms around her, leaving her mother no choice but to bid her a warm farewell. The girl herself thought that she had been acting strangely lately, but this could be explained by the fact that she was very nervous about being sent to the academy. She was still nervous, but now she was sure she was on the right track and had to make sure everything would be okay. She recalled how, when she was very young, they used to take walks in the woods with her mother while she picked berries from the full glade. Now she could say that she was fully grown, so she had to take responsibility for her life on her own. Her mother could only accept that her little bird was leaving the nest and going on her own. Already knowing exactly how this trip to the academy would end, the little girl, who was lucky enough to get a second chance from fate, knew that this time she would do everything she could. Exactly 120 years ago, after receiving the support of Princess Catherine, the nobility asked the mind of the empire to look into his soul for kindness and share his deep knowledge with them. The place where they all gathered was eventually called Cotton, and the academy located in its center was named Nobel. For nobles who happened to be born in a lower category, like the Neris, their education at this academy depended on their economic status. But for the children of the upper nobility, such as members of the royal family, there were always vacancies. They were obliged to study from the age of 12 to 19. All the lower-class nobles dreamed of getting here, but the children of the upper-class nobles knew that this academy was tantamount to a prison, because that's what they meant by the words compulsory education. Suddenly, the fascination with the sculpture, which was located right at the entrance to Cotton, was interrupted by a voice calling out to a little girl. Looking back at her interlocutor, who was being completely impolite to the stranger, the same woman actually ordered Neris to show her the way, as she thought the girl lived nearby. Neris may have been a pie girl at first glance, but she also had character, which she now had to demonstrate in order not to be at a disadvantage. She called herself the daughter of a knight, and said that the woman, who was apparently a member of the lower nobility, was behaving very rudely. After apologizing, Neris told the woman that although she had been rather rude to her, she would go unpunished this time. In exchange, the maid would have to leave the girl's company immediately. As the woman bowed before the Neris, she didn't even notice a luxurious carriage appear behind her, and a loud laugh came from it, which caught the girl's attention. One of the children of the upper nobility looked out and apologized for her maid, as she did sometimes behave rudely to strangers. This green-eyed girl clarified that her maid had no bad intentions, but only wanted to ask for directions. The green-eyed girl quickly left the carriage with the help of the butler and asked Neris if she was one of the Elanders. Neris did not understand why the assumption was made because of her former residence, but she clarified that judging by the shade of her eyes, she did not think that Neris was the daughter of a common knight. Among the 3 warriors who were able to defeat the fierce dragon in a grandiose manner, only one is famous for being a symbol of Elandria and having the eyes of a Buddha. Each of the descendants of the 3 warriors was born with different character traits, and these differences were usually manifested in their eyes. Thus, the first emperor, the brave Visto, had dark blue eyes, the righteous Elandria had purple eyes, and the charming Palos had gray eyes. However, their direct descendants were considered lost, and the entire family was cut off. At a time when even Elandria's eyes had gone out, Neris, a distant relative from a sideline, was born with purple eyes. After she had to celebrate her coming of age, she was able to see with her own eyes the precious ability of her special trait and was elevated to the place of the princess's crown. As she got closer to the Neris, the stranger reported that the Buddha's eyes were an exception, so she did not see them as often as she would have liked. With a face full of enthusiasm, the girl seemed to be looking into the eyes of the Neris, claiming that their eyes were the most beautiful she had ever seen in her short life. Clenching her fingers together, forming a fist out of her hand, Neris declared that she was in no way connected to Elandria. In her past life, she actively used her status, which was associated with her eyes, but now, remembering their color, she felt only disgust. So when the stranger said she came from the Trid family, she said she was disgusted. Deciding not to escalate the situation any further, the green-eyed woman accepted her interlocutor's words, saying that other families also had the opportunity to inherit the Buddha's eyes. Neris's words were so serious and her speech seemed so confident that the girl assumed that her interlocutor was already a sophomore, but now she was happy because they were both classmates. She introduced herself as Diane McKinnon. If the green-eyed girl did come from the McKinnon family, she was the daughter of Earl McKinnon, who owned one of the 3 largest chambers of commerce in the empire. It was a little strange, because Neris did not remember meeting Diane in her past life. Eventually, the butler had to inform the little miss that she shouldn't have stood on her feet for so long because it could have had a negative impact on them, but she claimed to be quite confident on them, so he shouldn't have worried. Naturally, Neris could not ignore this dialogue that was taking place in front of her face, so she involuntarily lowered her gaze. Her eyes quickly noticed how unsteady Diane was on her feet. Even if you didn't focus on it, you could see one of her legs shaking visibly. After calling out to Neris, Diane had to follow her butler's words and go to the carriage, but her interlocutor replied in a rather serious tone that the girl should not be too nice to her. Still, it was not a directed kindness, as they really did not know the way to the academy, and the Neris suitcases looked quite large for such a small girl. Eventually agreeing to this small offer, as it was a win-win situation for both of them, they quickly arrived at the academy, whose exterior looked charming and luxurious. As they walked inside, they were greeted by an equally luxurious interior in the hall. Diane had to thank Neris for being so kind and not leaving them in the lurch. Already sitting on the chairs, Diane sincerely thanked her new friend for helping them get here and for helping Diane personally get inside, but Neris replied that she only held her lightly. Diane told us that her legs were fine and that the adults were just exaggerating and saying that it would be harder and harder for her at the academy. Judging by the fact that Neris did not remember Diane's face, it followed that the adults were worried for no reason. It all stemmed from the fact that the competition at the academy was quite fierce, and it was not only difficult, but impossible for students with a weak character to adapt to such conditions. Diane's unsteady gait made her the center of attention, and her weakness was easy enough to figure out without even talking to her for a second. Even though only children studied at the academy, they are trained from childhood to recognize the weak and find everyone's weaknesses. Because Neris had already attended the academy, she already knew what the other noblemen's children were doing. Their tactics were quite simple. They would gather in groups, make friends, and then create a hierarchy within that group. It wouldn't have made sense if they didn't have a purpose, and since their purpose was to fill time out of boredom, it was the perfect and easy entertainment. Even as an adult, Neris remembered from her past life how her classmates liked to bully her. The punishment for showing her character was that they chained her to a desk in the academy yard in the rain. Standing under their umbrellas, they laughed at her maliciously, wanting her to get even more angry and break out. With her lips clenched until they were blue and large drops of sweat running down her hair and face onto her clothes, Neris could only endure and wait for them to get bored and eventually leave her alone. A bright and large bolt of lightning struck the ground, followed by loud words from one of the girls, who ordered the others to escort the Neris inside the academy. Already on the cold floor of the academy, the girl was irritated and tired. She couldn't get up because she had lost all her strength to contain her anger, but her classmates only encouraged her to show her character. Their words about her getting up and not stimulating the unbearable pain of being slightly drenched by the rain were not the last. They also remarked that they had heard rumors that because of the color of her eyes, she might be chosen as a candidate for crown princess. Of course, according to the other girls, she did not deserve this place, and more they tried to humiliate her. Noticing how the poor girl was shivering, having been sitting in the rain and strong wind for a long time, they missed with smiles on their faces that she might have been sick and had a fever. Deciding not to end their abuse there, they also dumped a bucket of water on her head, which was standing nearby. Neris looked as if she had already resigned herself to these events, which was understandable, since she had already exhausted all her strength. Before she left, one of them said that poor Neris should think about whether she really deserved to be crown princess. One of the many drops that remained on her head from the rain and water that had recently brought her back to consciousness fell into a puddle left by her soaked clothes. She claimed that she knew nothing about the place of the blood princess that she was supposed to take. These words really irritated one of the people present, and she came closer to the trembling girl, almost stepping on her palms, which she held on the floor, leaning on them. She stated that Neris was so stupid and disinterested in what was happening that she did not even know why she was enduring these humiliations literally every day. She was supposed to remain forever that short-sighted idiot who doesn't even want to change so as not to take the place of others. Let her live in ignorance for the rest of her life and then die like a clueless idiot. Her memories were interrupted by an unfamiliar voice that came from the stage, catching her attention. With his oratory and persuasiveness, this voice attracted the attention of many students. The narrative content of this voice was the story of 3 heroes who defeated the evil dragon Kion. It was thanks to this that the Vista Empire was able to become strong through the spirit of improvement. Suddenly, Neris turned her attention to a similarly glowing hair that had belonged to one of her abusers in her past life. She looked intently only at the owner. The voice from the stage did not stop, and he also said that he hoped that all the new students of this year, as citizens of the glorious Vista Empire, would not stay in the present and would learn the philosophy of the Nobel Academy. Perseverance and the desire to improve in the hearts of young students is actually a guarantee of success. They should not lose it, but only develop it further. With that, the silver-haired man concluded the induction ceremony, saying that the new students could already get acquainted with the dormitory thanks to the wardens who were already waiting for them in the hall. Standing up from her chair, Diane turned toward Nerissa to call out to her to come along. These small walks, and Diane's help, would be the beginning of a great friendship. Seeing that her friend looked terrible and was not feeling well, Diane's face instantly changed to one of concern and wanted to know why. It took only one look at one of her abusers for the memories to come flooding back to her, leaving her mind racing. She understood that such actions and the desire to get rid of this unpleasant feeling in her body would not help her, and she also had no intention of showing her weaknesses, so the only thing left was to calm down. Diane noticed that the girl looked rather pale, but she replied that she was just nervous and that they should go if they didn't want to be late. Suddenly, their attention was drawn to the conversations up ahead. They could hear that the first day of school had begun with fresh gossip, the topic of which was that Crown Prince Abelis and the Marquis's daughter Lycaandra were having a nice conversation. They wondered if little Lycaandra really had any intentions of taking the princess's place on the throne, but they also kept in mind that the Crown Prince had already met a lady whose name was spread in high society. It was unexpected to see such a pair even in a simple conversation, as it was most likely the first girl to approach the Crown Prince, and an unusual girl, Megara Lycaandra herself. Wandering around the garden near the academy, Neris decided to clear her head, as she was surprised by her own behavior. She couldn't even think that she could have been so nervous just because of a simple meeting with Megara. Her walk, filled with silence and enjoyment of the beautiful scenery, was interrupted by a voice that wanted to know who this unknown girl was. He said that he hadn't thought at all that someone should have been present at the academy, because it was still vacation time. But the unknown person did not care that much, because his main concern was that someone from the unknown had entered the territory. Neris remembered this shortcut, which she had used extensively in her past life, but she did not remember anyone stopping and asking her questions. Although she was new, she was not lost at all. She knew that she was now in the Pisalza, which was a forbidden place to bring in all kinds of objects. His voice began to tremble a little, but he found the strength to simply chase the girl away from the place, saying that she knew a lot for her age. To this, the girl remarked that the boy needed to be equally careful, because if he kept dirty things in his ear, he would quickly die from drug intoxication, addressing him by the name Ren Fael. Confusion and interest appeared on Fael's surprised face when he heard his own name from the lips of the girl who was new to him, according to her. It was impossible for the younger brother of the former Pope Tacitus VI to have gotten himself a similar item, so it meant that this item had been passed down to him from other hands. His expression was so filled with surprise that some of his muscles relaxed, and he involuntarily let the leaf fall from his mouth. In her past life, Neris took advantage of the fact that she had magical eyes, But in this life, she decided to use the position of all the facts and acquaintances she knew from her past life, so she had to know that Fail had died alone from intoxication. In the past, she hadn't paid attention to such things and didn't dwell on them, but now, thinking about it, she could find logic in absolutely everything. The current Pope Omnitus III considered Ren, the younger brother of former Pope Pius II, superfluous to their cause. So by invading the trust of the Ren Fail, whose soul was completely lost after the loss of his entire family, he made the poor boy rely on him. After the Fael completely trusted Pope Omnitus III, the man began to feed him a poisonous herb that had a strong sedative effect, but thereby led to a slow and horrible death. Addressing the boy on the other side of the fence, Neris said that he should not be gullible to anyone and choose his close people very carefully. Answering that faith was the most important thing for a priest, he attracted the attention of the girl, who looked back at him and said that her words were not empty and that he should have listened to her. Fail wondered what his interlocutor knew that she was trying so hard to protect him, but he still had no idea how a simple letter could destroy him, so he was about to put it back in his mouth. Gathering all her strength, she said that if she were in the boy's shoes, she would definitely find a way to take revenge on the person who had harmed her and do it properly. As she turned around and prepared to walk in the opposite direction from where she was talking to the Fayel, she spoke about how she would have been very sorry if he had died from the poisonous herb at such a young age, so he should have quit. Finding some meaning in the girl's words, he finally examined the letter carefully, wondering if it was really worth it. There is no escaping bullying and hierarchy in the world, even if you are an adult, not to mention children who can be very cruel. Everybody had the same fate if they were to be born weak, so age had no bearing on it at all. The Nobel Academy was no exception, as similar things happened there quite often, if not every day. Looking at the building, which was familiar to the girl not for the first time in her life, she pondered her fate to be in this particular period of her life. Not wanting to look at these magnificent walls outside such a horrible building anymore, she turned around, finally realizing the meaning of her stay. She could not forgive all the abuse from Valentine and her family, nor could she forgive the abuse from her classmates. It was within the academy that the turning point of her misfortune occurred, and from that moment on, she had to take revenge on everyone. Everyone knew that the Nobel Academy was divided into two branches, which taught classes in different disciplines. These included the Kartak, which was a male branch that taught fencing, magic, politics, and theology. In addition to the men's branch, there was a women's branch called Aina, where they taught regular lessons and the same theology. On their first day at Nobel Academy, all new students have to take a test, and depending on the results of this test, these children will be divided into the appropriate classes. To put it another way, if a certain child had grades that exceeded the level of knowledge of the corresponding grade, he or she could skip it. On the day when the results of these tests were known, students gathered around the board with their names on it and looked for theirs, hoping that they would be able to separate themselves from the others. All the students were surprised when they saw Neris Trid first on the board, because they could not even miss who the new girl was. Neris herself was already set up for this, because she knew perfectly well that her mind was much more separate from the minds of the other children, because she was the same age as them. She was surprised by a call from Diane, who had really hoped that they would attend classes together, but seeing as she had passed the test, she was able to skip one course and move on to the second. To this, Neris replied that they would still have joint classes, as the main subjects are common to all students, which brought a smile to Diane's face. Neris's words were surprising to the green-eyed girl, as she could not even imagine that her friend could have known about such things. Calling her friend brilliant, Diane did not even know what this silent girl was really capable of. She also said that among all the people she met and knew, she was the most elegant and intelligent, even without relying on the fact that she took first place in the overall competition. If she had been in her interlocutor's shoes, the entire academy would have known about this long ago. But looking at the Neris's serious endurance, she could not help but envy her. Because Diane was quite annoying, she began to beg Neris to tell her nickname, and Neris decided that it would be best if her friend called her Reese, like her mother. Thinking that if the Megara decides to destroy the beginning of her life again, Then, in exchange, the Naletian will be able to repay her in kind. According to the course of events, the Neris life will unfold. She didn't want to hear the name he called her anymore, which was so painful to hear because it sounded like his. The unexpected conversation between the girls and Neris's thoughts were interrupted by a very quiet cough, which wanted to draw attention to itself and did what it wanted to do. A small, big-eyed girl appeared in front of her and Diane, introducing herself as Angara Nain, saying that Neris should know her because they had played together as children. Her gaze, which had been completely calm and gentle, instantly turned vicious. Her eyes turned bright pink, looking at Angara as if burning a hole in her. Holding her angry eyes as if she saw an enemy in front of her, Neris averted her own gaze, saying that she was not even a name in her life. Determined to continue, to try to recall her existence in Neris's early childhood, Angara said that they walked together in the Lowen forest and played with boats they made from tree leaves. These words passed like an imperceptible magical current through Neris's body, because everything that happened that day is firmly in her memory to this day. It was impossible not to remember the hanger, because it was impossible to forget the one who was her only friend. However, the same friend acted very incorrectly towards Neris when she mistreated her in order to get closer to the Megara. With a completely calm expression on her face, Neris replied that she would later ask her mother about the hanger, who might remember her. These words caused the Angara to pause, as if she had something else to say. Her face looked worried, and her hands were fidgeting. The blue-eyed girl didn't give up so easily. She wanted to try to get closer to Nihilus, at least a little, by asking her which teacher she had taken lessons from. If they were from the same feudal lordship, then perhaps the Angara also knew the teacher who taught the Neris and could try to reach her level. With a completely calm face, Neris replied that it was fate that decided this case, and that she was just lucky to be born with such a mind. She hoped that this answer would be enough for her interlocutor, because she did not want to repeat the same mistakes she had made in her past life and live this life differently. She will no longer trust her childhood friend, only to be cruelly abandoned again. Another student of the academy also joined their dialogue, saying that she had accidentally overheard the conversation and did not want to stay in the party. She said that the name of the teacher who taught Neris should not have been so secret, and she should not have been so selfish. It must be that she decided to put herself above the others only because she took first place in the poll. In her opinion, this first place was not taken by chance, and her loud tone meant that others could hear this conversation as well. Deciding to stand up for herself, Neris said that her father had died when she was very young, so her family did not have the money to have a teacher, which meant that the girl's interrogations were completely illogical. Even now, she accepts help from distant relatives who are able to pay for her education at this academy. Of course, the Count's granddaughter, named Rhiannon Bertha, could not even imagine such a situation, because she could never even miss the fact that not as rich as she was can be born smart. Rhiannon took these words as a challenge, and her tone of voice rose significantly as she tried to find out the truth about Neris's high score, because she did not believe in ordinary luck. Neris was not going to prove her innocence and honesty. She only said that she had learned the sacred language from a priest. In response to this, Rhiannon asked her interlocutor if this training included learning manners. Since Neris had previously reported that she had no teacher, it would make sense that she was not at all aware of manners in Rhiannon's opinion. In response, Neris didn't even know if she could call it a relief to her soul, since her interlocutor was not at all distinguishable from Rhiannon from her past life. Judging by the old Rhiannon's character, one could say that she always mocked the Neris, being in a state of full confidence that everyone would take her side. Then Neris continued her words, that even though she was the daughter of a knight of low birth, she should not have tolerated such treatment, and given the curriculum of Rhiannon County, she was simply jealous of her grade. However, looking at her behavior, which went beyond the norm, Neris wondered if Rhiannon had really been trained in the etiquette for which she was criticizing her. Rihanna's face showed anger at not being able to achieve what she wanted. She realized that she had taken a completely unfavorable position in this conversation and would no longer receive everyone's support. Diane also stood up in support of Nellis, accusing Rhiannon of wanting to start a fight by sarcastically answering questions. The crowd that had gathered around Neris was watching this quarrel. Everyone watched with emotion as Diane tried to stand up for her friend, relying on the inferiority complex that lurked within Rhiannon. In the end, the whole circle began to support Nerys, arguing that Rhiannon had really gone too far and that even if she was that jealous, it was too much. In the end, their quarrel was stopped by Megara, who told them that the lesson was about to start and that the noise the girls had made was not worth the price. Looking at Megara, who was coming closer and closer to them, Rhiannon couldn't understand why she hadn't come to her defense as well. Megara apologized to Nerys for her friend's behavior, as her jealousy had gone beyond the pale. But at the same time, she noted that the first place that Nerys took was also surprising, eventually accepting that she really did it on her own. These two girls met for the first time, so Megara introduced herself and asked that their team not have such quarrels, because she wanted to live in peace and harmony, regardless of who took first place and who took second. Even if her words were not meant to be ridiculing or teasing, it was clear from her expression that she was still the megalomaniac she knew. Finally, putting a kind smile back on her face, Megara congratulated Nerys on her first place. It was as if the child who was sponsored by Elandria had differences from others. These differences were evident in her rapid learning. A teacher walked into the classroom and did not understand why the students were not in their seats. He couldn't understand what they were doing instead of preparing for class. Taking his seat and asking the students to take their seats, he emphasized that he was going to hand out test results and their schedules. Megara had already obeyed the man and began to approach her seat, but suddenly Nerys called out to her to stay in her seat. She asked me to accept her congratulations in return as well, which I found was to be the beginning of their long friendship. Noting that she wanted Megara to take care of her, her face instantly stopped being as calm and emotionless as usual. She smiled at her as her eyes lit up with bright color. At the very beginning of the semester, all students at the academy were to be divided into two subcategories, namely strong and weak. When handing in the test results, the teacher pointed out to each student what their strengths were so that they could develop in this area. It was interesting to see what the criteria for this distribution were, since in the end, Nerys was among the weakest. It was because of this simple accident that she had to endure such an attitude towards herself throughout her studies, and she could do nothing against it. As she waited for the teacher to approach the Megara, she was completely focused on what role she would play in this period of her life. Noting that Megara had turned in an almost perfect paper that took second place, the man said that in some subjects she could have skipped a course, so she should definitely look at her schedule before going to class. Megara's eyes were full of enthusiasm and gratitude towards Professor Sheridan, as if she had not expected to receive such pleasant words in her address. As she walked to her seat, whispers could be heard throughout the room with her as the topic of conversation. Some of the students remarked that everyone in Lycaandra's family was different and that Megara was amazing. Professor Sheridan was the next to call Nerys Trid, who immediately got up from her chair and was about to head in his direction. Passing by the Megars, a strange atmosphere hung between them for a moment until the Nerys moved on. Looking back at Nerys, who had just passed her, Megara gave her an iron gaze. It was fun for the girl to watch Megara's childhood, as she always pretended to be kind and good, looking at everyone with a smile on her face. Right now, Nerys could see the disgruntled face full of envy of her actual rival, who was definitely not happy to be in second place. Professor Sheridan was very complimentary of Nerys because she answered all the questions correctly. She had jumped all the courses except for the basic ones that everyone has to take, so it would have been good for her to check her schedule as well. Looking back, as she was about to leave the teacher, Nerys was really curious why all these years had been so difficult for her from the past. She was curious to know the reason why she tolerated them while hiding in the shadows from Megara's evil gaze. In addition to being bullied at school, Nalishan was also waiting for her at home, forcing Nerys to join his family and using her to further his own ambitions. Nalisha's younger sister, Valentine, must have hated Nerys with all her heart because she had suddenly appeared out of nowhere and become the crown princess. And for Prince Abel himself, she was probably not the most pleasant object in his life either, since it was he who was to marry her. It was all connected, because everyone had a reason, except for one horrifying person who led Nerys into hell itself. All of the girls at the academy, especially Megara, had no reason to bully her, but they did it anyway. Perhaps she should have accepted it, because nothing would have changed if she had known the real reason. There was some laughter from Rhiannon's seat, which was too quiet to be noticed by the professor, but it was easily noticed by Neris, who was passing by her seat. Behind it, she also heard a mockery from her about the girl acting too arrogantly, not knowing her place. This became an impetus for the already adult mind of Nerissa to understand all the reasons for such a rude agreement with her. It was because all the girls at the academy had an inferiority complex and were jealous that the daughter of a low-level knight usually had high grades and a non-standard appearance. Perhaps they were still superficial, but in their entire lives they had never seen such pure emotions like theirs. When their first lesson was over, everyone usually scattered to different corners of the corridor, talking loudly among themselves, with only Angara Nain standing alone far away from the others. Diane McKinnon noticed this too, and decided to ask her friend if they really did not know each other. She didn't have time to think about it, but she did, so she said she didn't remember her at all. After receiving a similar answer to the previous one, Diane decided to believe it and not to bother her interlocutor anymore. In response, she said that Diane should have gone back to her studies, as she had another class soon. She hadn't been there herself for a while, so she wanted to spend some time getting to know the academy better. Looking into the eyes of the Neris, Diane also noted that she would not mind keeping the Neris company, but it would be very rude to skip her classes. Neris replied that they would have plenty of time in the future, so they would have time to walk together again someday. This answer completely satisfied Diane, and she was about to leave Neris because she had to go to school to get her degree. She hadn't had time to forget the kind gesture of her rescuer, who had recently supported Neris. She decided not to waste time and thank her right now, so as not to remain in debt. Unexpectedly, those warm words from the lips of her unassuming acquaintance seemed gentle and frank, which even lifted her spirits a bit. Eventually, they had to say goodbye before the green-eyed girl was late for her classes, so she smiled at her friend one last time and left her company. After saying goodbye to Diane, Neris was already coming up with a plan for where she should go now, because she knew the academy very well. Eventually, she decided to go to her secret place, which she remembered from her previous life. It was near Zachary's library and was supposed to be quite quiet. It was named in honor of Saint Zacharias, who in the distant past made a great contribution to modern medicine. However, because the nobility avoided classes, the library was always empty, which is why this place was particularly deserted, which was very pleasing to Nevis's lonely soul. The silence could have given her at least some time to think, during which she had to consider how to proceed. It should have been a magical plan, but it could not have come to fruition because of the guard who met Neris right at the entrance. His greeting could not be called friendly and warm, because as soon as the girl stepped onto the threshold of the library, the sharp blade of the guard's sword appeared in front of her face. Of course, this shocked her, because in her previous life, no one was interested in the place at all, so she could not even expect danger here. Remaining completely unemotional and unspoken, Neris did not want to answer the guard's questions about who she was. Cledwyn of Mainland was the successor to the only Archduke family in the country. After his own graduation from the academy, he repressed all the elders of his family who opposed his inheritance of the title, and then received the northern part of the empire under his rule. However, Abalus and other nobles could not accept his arrival and ridiculed him, calling him a cruel monster. In his past life, they hadn't even crossed paths, so no one could have imagined that Nellis would run into him at the library door. When the blade almost reached her neck, she did not change her expression from calm. She wondered where exactly he had been taught such manners, to poke a sword down a stranger's throat at every single person he met. He was not in the mood for jokes or measuring his anger, so he ordered the girl to tell him who she was and how she knew about this place. Eventually resigned to the fact that she would not be able to get around Cledwyn, she told him that she was just a normal first year, but the boy refused to believe that freshmen could know about such places, continuing to hold the sword in his hands. His gaze was focused. He looked at the girl as closely as he could, trying to recognize her as an enemy, but instead he saw only bright eyes that looked directly into his soul, and he immediately realized that she was the possessor of the Buddha's eyes. Realizing that Cledwyn was not a threat, she confidently touched his sharp sword with her fingertip, which was most likely meant to frighten her. She confirmed his words, but commented that she did not want to be classified as a non-legionist or associated with him in any way. Such actions of a difficult girl brought a small smile to Cledwyn's face. He couldn't understand what kind of girl she was, since she touched the sword so fearlessly with her bare hands. As he put away his sword, he wanted to learn more about the girl and her affiliation with the Nilisian family. He wondered how it was that she did not want to be associated with him. She asked the guy to stop talking about it, because it was not a topic she wanted to bring up by addressing him by name. Cledwyn thought it was unfair that even a first-year student knew his name, but had not yet been introduced to him. So he decided not to wait for her to wish him out and take the matter into his own hands. The answer was not what the boy expected, but it once again confirmed the seriousness of the girl's character. Namely, she said that the boy's name was hers, so he would also have to find out her name himself if he wanted to know it. The unexpected response seemed indeed in keeping with the young Neris's character, but Cledwyn himself did not yet know her name or her full acuity of character. Turning in the opposite direction from him, since this conversation was over for Neris, she had to get back to her business. Before the girl left the room, he called out to her one last time, telling her that next time he would definitely call her by name. It looked like the boy was no less serious. Once back inside the academy building, Neris had to return to her studies, despite all the other students who were also in the corridor. The bright rays of the warm sun shone through the window glass and into the corridor filled with students. Nerys remembered that Abelis always commented on the whole image of Cledwyn as cold-blooded, but he didn't really look like that. When I looked at him, even the emotions of such an emotionless girl as Neris were confused. In the end, she couldn't exactly believe the Abelis's assessment of Cledwyn. After all, the girl had to have her own idea of her social circle without relying on others, so to her, the recent acquaintance looked like a very good person. Suddenly, another of her recent acquaintances, Ren File, appeared behind Neris, who accidentally bumped into the girl, calling her a lover of sticking her nose in everything. When the guy asked her what she had forgotten on this floor, since she had recently introduced herself as a freshman, she replied that she was not lost at all and knew she was here because she had classes here. This seemed unexpected to Fael because he did not expect to see her again, especially within the academy. Their first meeting went by so quickly that he did not even have time to ask her her name. Neris wondered why the boy was studying Verlaine, since it was an advanced course among the optional subjects, so only a small part of the students who studied at the Faculty of Theology, to which Fael belonged, took it. After commenting that the freshman's knowledge was too in-depth, the guy nevertheless decided to answer that his maternal uncle lived in Verlaine, so if he came to visit him, it would be nice to speak the language. Recalling her past life, Neris recalled that Fael's maternal brother was a close associate of Omnitus III, so she had to warn her interlocutor to be careful. As she opened the door to the classroom where she was to have a lecture on the Verlaine language, she considered her next steps in response to Fael's warning of caution. Unexpectedly, she was called into her office by an old acquaintance named Megara, whom she was not at all happy to meet, having already managed to take a place for herself. Megara had a warm smile on her face, as if she was really happy to see her. The words were appropriate. She had not expected to see her, but this surprise was happy. Because she did not know that Neris would also be present in the class, she had already chosen a seat next to the Maharad's brother, so they could not sit together. There were only 2 reasons why she, a freshman, could take an advanced course in diplomatic Verlaine. The first of which was that she was the only excellent student in all subjects who reported in her test paper that she wanted to take advanced Verlaine. Unlike the excellent student Neris, Megara got the opportunity to attend these courses with the help of her family's strength, and after she learned that she would be the first to attend, to prove that she was as good as the girl who took first place. She couldn't help but agree to Megara's suggestion that they sit down together the next time they discussed the same subject, as it could definitely arouse suspicion. One of the boys standing next to her asked if he knew the family of her interlocutor, and she replied that they had only found out about Neris, after she had won first place in the exams. The rumors spread throughout the academy, so the boy simply could not help but know that she was the girl who had passed the tests without a single mistake. They were jealous that Neris was able to take first place, so they decided to mock her, saying that if they had won first place, they would have bragged about it everywhere. Fael was quick to notice this. Undaunted, Neris responded by telling the guy that she didn't have as many friends as he did, so her bragging about her own results would be useless. In any case, since it was an advanced elective, she felt awkward attending it as the only freshman. It was good that Megara was able to get into this course anyway, because now Neris will not be so lonely among other students. Clenching her hand into a fist to hold back all the anger she'd built up while talking to Neris, watching her sit down in front of her with Fael, holding his piercing gaze on his neighbor, Fael reflected on how well she was able to respond to rudeness. The elegance of her words literally attacked the Megara, which was surprising. Noticing this, Neris dared to ask him what was going on, but Fael did not even know what to say, so his answer was very brief and incomprehensible. Eventually, the teacher of the Verlaine lecture had to return to the classroom. He was not only a teacher of this subject, but also of international politics, so the students who studied it already knew Henri Walter. The man said that he really hoped that the students had taken the time to read the example text in Waltherian that he had given them long before the first lesson. Now their first task was to try to translate it according to the context and situation. For Neris, this was expected, because she had expected a similar task from Sarah Voltaire. Suddenly, in the back of the classroom, the man saw a raised hand and asked the student what the raised hand meant. This student was Megara Lycaandra, whom the professor would love to hear from. This could mean an interest in the subject, so the professor had to make an effort not to stop her enthusiasm. Rising from her seat, Megara began to rapidly translate the text on the sheet of paper. She was accompanied by a vigorous reaction from her classmates, who were listening attentively. Listening attentively to Megara's translation, the man heard quiet whispers from the audience that Megara did not take second place, but she was doing quite well. He turned his gaze to the one girl who had actually won first place without making a single mistake in her tests. He asked her if she thought the same way. It was a kind of questioning if she really did not use only her knowledge when taking that test, and it raised doubts not only among the other students, but also among the teachers. Neris replied with a nonchalant expression that Megara had not made any mistakes in her retelling, but that her answer was also incorrect. Neris's remark caused a stir in the classroom among all the students. They claimed that they did not understand her remark at all, because they did not understand where Megara had gone wrong. It seems that the first place in the tests completely destroyed her head, so now she cannot think objectively, praising only herself. The ambiguous answer also made the teacher curious. He asked her what she meant by saying that Megara was not wrong, but she did not give the right answer either, so he wanted to hear the correct answer from Neris tried. She replied that Livingstone, who was an ambassador sent to Gaul, tried to implement popular policy with improved relations with the inhabitants. However, there were some limits, and because the budget allocated for his trip ran out, he was killed. Megara's neighbor reacted strongly to this, because according to her neighbor, Livingston Kinsey tried to improve the windmills, but due to a lack of budget, he failed and was killed. Thinking about the fact that her answer was completely different from Lycaandra's, the man decided to ask young Neris why she had chosen this interpretation of the text. After agreeing to substantiate all of her above words, she rose from her seat to draw even more attention to her arguments. Megara, behind her, also pondered the meaning of her words, since she had not made any mistakes in meaning, and therefore did not understand what Neris wanted to get with her loud statements. She explained that the surname Kinsey, which Megara interpreted, is actually pronounced kanji, and is used in Varlina diplomatic contexts to refer to an ambassador. Such words from Megara's actual rival came as a great shock to her, as she herself did not think that Neris could go so deep into dictionaries. With a thoughtful expression on his face, the professor continued to listen to all the explanations, and as for Neris, she mentioned that windmills are also interpreted as a wrong flow in a certain context. It was based on these factors that she translated the content of the example sentence as a story about Ambassador Livingston, who was assassinated because of the failure of his policies. In a somewhat displeased tone, the professor remarked that it was more of a free translation than a literal one. Nellis added many of her own conclusions and interpreted it based on her own reflections. She did not deny that she had done so because she had decided that this was what the man meant. Earlier, he had told her to interpret the sentence according to the context and situation, which she had tried to do. In addition, the point of deepening knowledge of the Verlaine language for this class was dedicated to diplomacy, so it was most logical to interpret this sentence to meet these requirements. Also, based on the fact that Voltaire himself was a diplomat, she thought that he would want to hear a similar answer. Without responding to the little girl's statements, the professor asked the entire audience why they thought they should learn foreign languages. To communicate with foreigners, it would be faster to hire an interpreter or use the Loon language, which many people know. The answer to his question was voiced by Neris, who said that she existed to win in democracy, and it was the right answer. All the students present in this room were learning a foreign language to improve their diplomatic skills, and they had to keep this thought in mind at all times so as not to ask unnecessary questions about it. They did not have to take all the words literally. The key to their success was that they were able to analyze and think about the meaning, not just consume what was right on the surface. Megara's face turned a delicate shade of pink when she heard these words from the professor's lips, slowly realizing that this class might be her last in this course. She couldn't understand how Neris had gotten around her again. Summing up, the professor said that everyone in the classroom should delve into the meaning of all the words they hear. Otherwise, they may have problems. Neris, in turn, knew about this, and therefore, unlike her peers, she can take this class now. Everyone in the audience dramatically changed their minds about Neris, because before the professor's words, they had only thought that she was another know-it-all, but in fact she had in-depth knowledge in her head. Megara Lacandra's face grew even more nervous when she heard the professor call out to her. The atmosphere around her was not calm enough as it was, and now her heart was pounding out of her chest. The man said that he only wanted to see students in his class who could keep up with him. When he asked her if they were really enrolled in this course because of Madame Hoffman's recommendation and heard a positive answer, he asked her to stay after class for a while. During this, they would conduct a small test on the Verlaine language. She shouldn't have worried, as the professor promised that he would write an explanatory note to the teacher whose class Megara was to attend next. Megara's neighbor chimed in on the man's remark. He asked Professor Voltaire why he would not conduct a similar test for a first-year girl. With a calm face, he told the young man that Neris had already proved that she had sufficient Verlaine language skills to stay within the visitation limits. Holding her anger in check, Megara asked Sir Voltaire, "What happens if I fail this test?" Questions like this gave the man a headache, so he answered very briefly that if Megara could not pass this test, she would be sent to a class with the appropriate level of difficulty. She will not be able to rely on her neighbor's answers forever, because if he gives her the wrong answer, she will make a mistake too. Her thoughts were filled with potential anger at Maharada's brother, because she should have realized that she should not have relied on the knowledge of a fool like him. This made Neris smile with satisfaction, because she had achieved what she had been seeking all along: justice. A whole crowd gathered around Megara to support her and motivate her to move on, rather than focus on the opinions of others. Looking in Neris Trid's direction, all the girls claimed that it was her fault that Megara did not please the professor. Although Sir Voltaire himself was irritable and picky, Megara herself continued to grieve and claimed that she should have been better prepared and trained at the level of a ducal residence, so she had only herself to blame for her lack of preparation. Diane again decided to support her friend and stand up for her, arguing that she had previously told her that she had never studied at the Duke's mansion. Megara herself was so jealous of her because she had entered an advanced class without relying on herself and failed, so it made no sense to provoke such shyness, since it was Megara's fault. While listening to her friend's defense, she did not understand what Mahara's envy was about. She didn't think that the whole truth was hidden there. Because of this, she would not have wanted to jump in over her head so much. I used to not believe that Megara hated her only because Neris was strange by all the social standards of those around her. But if you think about her behavior, which was significantly different from the behavior of other children, a noble and brilliant daughter of the Marquis, as well as a beauty and owner of magical liquid purple eyes that fully proved her belonging to the descendants of Elandria. Megara was jealous of the knight's ordinary daughter. The sudden appearance of the owner of real eyes, and even with eyes that exceeded Megara's estimates. Megara herself could not bear the very fact of her existence, so here too, her eyes were the source of all the misery in Neris's life. Following Neris's reaction, Diane continued to feel a little embarrassed that Neris had to hear such words addressed to her, because she thought her sad look was related to it. The thought also crossed her mind that she thought Diane's behavior was too reckless, because she didn't even want to pay attention to it. When you think about it, Neris was truly the smartest person Diane had ever met. She was a combination of kindness, elegance, and the ability to stand up for herself. She seemed really more mature than her peers, keeping rude people away from her. Perhaps because Diane will behave too unculturally, based on the example of a similar situation that happened a moment ago. Nellis would not like it either, and her mood would deteriorate again. But in reality, the girl's thoughts were filled with something else entirely. I actually thought Neris was a very interesting person, so I wanted to get closer to her and become friends. But because they were taking different classes, the chances were too slim. Suddenly, a thought popped into her mind about how she and I could get closer. Suddenly grabbing Neris's hands, Diane loudly invited her to a party she was going to host and would like Neris to join her. Diane's face was full of joy, as if she had already been looking forward to this party. Her words were full of enthusiasm as she said that they could spend this day together or invite their friends. Neris saw no reason for her friend's behavior, since she hadn't done anything special for her. But since she didn't see anything wrong with a simple invitation to a party, she didn't miss the opportunity to trust Diane and spend the day with her. Lifting her friend's grasped hand, Diane shouted joyfully, and remarking that this day would be especially joyful and would definitely not let Neris get bored. She had to have a magical party, no matter what. It was important for her and Neris's relationship to be stronger, and for Neris to be able to distract herself. She already had an idea of a close relationship with a close friend in her head, but so far they remained dreams. All of these thoughts led Neris to think that Diane was very strange, and Diane to think that she and Neris were real friends. His Highness greeted Duke Grunegel's daughter, Natasha, who brought him papers with the necessary information, which he asked her to obtain for him. These papers were answer sheets for the first-year students of the Nobel Academy. Albus reacted immediately, taking them in his hands and looking very interested. He praised Natasha for such high-quality work, which he was very pleased with, and took them in full in front of him for further review. Looking for the name of the one and only Neris tried among all the huge papers, he counted them at a frantic pace and finally saw the letters. One of the other people in the room was also curious as to what His Highness found so interesting in the ordinary forms of the first-year students. So he put away the rest of the papers, focusing his attention only on Neris Trids. Turning his head to the man who had called him over, His Highness eventually suggested that he also take a look at these forms and find something useful for himself. The representative of the interested person to His Highness's respective interest in the papers was Nelicio himself, who was later known as a foster father to Neris. Abelis said that Nelson would also like to see the results of this girl, whose education was paid for by his family. The crown prince of the imperial family of Visto noted that she had the highest score among all her peers. After handing the necessary papers to Nerison, Abelis also commented that Mahradi Enim himself was interested in this, asking questions about it. This Mahradi did not believe that she was capable of passing the test on her own with the highest score, being a noblewoman of the lowest class, so she claimed that her answers were copied or prepared in advance. Nelson's eyes rounded as he began to delve into the content of the text Abelis had handed him. A deadly question arose in his mind. Was this text really written by a freshman? Clutching the sheet in his hands, the white-haired man really wondered if the first-year student was really capable of such a thing. The answers were written down very competently and without unnecessary details, which made him think about the real age of this test. Turning half sideways and facing Nellison, His Highness also wondered the same thing. He was curious about the white-haired man's opinion, but it was clear from a glance at the letter. Many people suspected that Neris had indeed received this grade dishonestly and passed the test, but so far no one could confirm this. Eventually, realizing that it was just a routine test, Nellison breathed a sigh of relief. It was a routine test, as Nellison had assumed from the beginning that Abalus would not do something like this for some sideline relative. This is exactly what the Crown Prince wanted to hear, because he was simply asked to review all the documents because of a complaint. He just needed another confirmation of this. According to all the teachers, Neris was as literate as an adult and could easily keep up with the classes of a fairly high level. So His Highness wanted to know if Nellison had been involved in her education, but he denied it. According to the investigation, Neris was also not an illegitimate child of the temple, so this led the Crown Prince to even more reflection. It is a fact that Neris was most likely born a genius, and if this was true, she could have played a good role near the imperial family. Nellison also confirmed this with the same smile on his face as Abalus, fully understanding his train of thought and assumptions. Previously, Nellison had only thought that Neris was an ordinary girl who happened to be born with the eyes of a Buddha. But now, knowing much more about her, he might have missed that she would be very useful if she really had such a gift, to remain as quiet as ever. Neris wished she could be alone there now and think about her plan of action, but unfortunately, she had to be alone there because of Cledwyn. Through the same window on the roof, one could see the same Cledwyn who guarded the library from unwanted people. The guy enjoyed his solitude and the opportunity to take a break, absorbing the sun's rays. Suddenly, his eyes opened, and he seemed to ask a question to the unknown. Had she finished her investigation?